I'm Josh Harris, and you're listening to Clear and Loud, a podcast about the ideas, stories, and voices that are shaping our world. There's something incredibly powerful about a person who is at peace with their own story. They've processed it. They've owned all of it, the good and the bad, and then who is able to share that story courageously with the world. Those people, whether we agree with their viewpoints or not, have an impact. They shape the world in a powerful way as they communicate their story with others. But how does someone get to that point? How do you sort through and organize your experiences? And even more daunting, how do you take all those ideas and reflections and insight from your mind and put them on a page? Whether or not you want to publish a book, if you've ever thought about putting your story on paper, Allison Fallon is someone that you want to pay attention to. Besides being an award-winning author and a sought-after public speaker, Allison is a writing coach who has guided thousands of writers, from New York Times bestselling authors to total beginners, to help them finally get their books written and on shelves. And I'm really looking forward to talking with Allison because she embodies a part of what I've always wanted to focus on in this podcast, and that is the power of an individual story and how important that is, not only for that individual to be able to think through and process, but also the power of that story in the way that it helps and it serves others. And that really is what Allison is all about. So for the first year of this podcast, we've given more of a focus to business, which is great. And we'll continue to do that because that's a big part of my life, thinking about business ideas, business practices. Obviously, I run a marketing agency that helps people grow their businesses. But another aspect of what I do is helping people think through change and transformation and that inner journey that often takes an outward expression, helping people with their message, with their big idea. And that's why this conversation with Allison is one that I think is so important. She is someone I really, really respect and look up to. I've benefited from her work. And I think a lot of you, whether or not you've ever thought about writing a book, I think the insights that Allison has could be life-changing. Here's our conversation. Allison, how many books have you written yourself, like with your name on the cover, your own books?
3.
And what are those?
So my very first book is called Packing Light, Thoughts on Living Life with Less Baggage. That's a memoir, a coming-of-age story about going on a road trip to visit all 50 states. And then
very cool.
My second book is called Indestructible, Leveraging Your Broken Heart to Become a Force of Love and Change in the World. And that is the story of my divorce and coming home to myself on the other side of that experience. And then my third book is called The Power of Writing It Down, a simple daily habit to unlock your brain and reimagine your life. And that book is my most recent book. That's a tool for anyone who wants to use writing as like a tool for personal growth.
Amazing. Well, we're going to talk about that one in particular. I was just thinking about how there's a lot of awe and I would say insecurity around writing. And what I mean by awe is that people, especially who are not writers, are like so impressed by anyone who's written, like, oh my gosh, especially if they're published.
Yes.
And those that want to become published are just kind of like, oh my goodness, you're a writer. But then this insecurity that they could never do that themselves, or that writing is so hard. Did you experience that kind of
Oh yeah.
reaction to writing?
I still have that. I mean, I still have it around. I don't have it as far as like my daily writing practice. And when I sit down to write a book, it's been demystified for me. So I don't have the same sort of veneration of the writer that I used to have that when I first left my full-time job to become a published writer. But what I have now is when I read the greats, you know, like when I read a book that really moves me and I forget that I'm reading a book and I just get sucked into the vortex of this beautiful prose.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, what would it be like to have this brilliance happen in your brain and come out on the page, you know?
Right.
So I think like I still get swept away by really great writers. But I do want to say that the veneration of what it means to be a writer gets pulled out from underneath of you very quickly when you actually start writing, because you know, the image that I had of the writer in my brain before I ever did that was that you would, you know, in my image, in my vision, it was like, okay, I'm going to be sitting in a coffee shop and there's going to be sun streaming through the window. It was almost like a movie.
Yeah,
and I'm going to be
romanticized. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just the words are just going to flow onto the page, and the experience of writing is not anywhere in the ballpark of that idealized vision. So when you start to do it, you realize that writing is just like anything else. It's like, you know, I've used the analogy before, like farming or like cleaning houses or like any other thing that we would do, where you just get in the muck and you get the work done. And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not as great. And you just show up and do it again every day.
And it's almost like until you demystify it, you can never really make any progress, because you keep waiting for this like heavenly, you know, encounter or something.
And it doesn't come. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get your start? Like you know, you talked about your 3 books. Like what was your start in writing?
Well, it depends on what you mean by start, but I always kind of knew in my heart that I wanted to be a writer. And I had this back and forth wrestle, because people would tell me, you can't make any money being a writer. You got to have a backup plan. And so my backup plan was teaching, because it seemed like an obvious fit. I figured I could teach writing during the school year, and then in the summers I would do like, you know, my writing, and that way I'd have a steady income. That plan kind of started to fall apart for me, because I realized I didn't really want to be a teacher, and teaching is not a part-time profession. It's not like you're working 9 months a year and then 3 months a year you're just off and footloose and fancy free. Teaching is like a full-time, full body, all in kind of sport. And if you aren't really in it with your whole heart, then you better get out of the way, because someone else is going to be a much better fit for the kids. And so I lasted like not even 3 full years teaching. And, you know, I knew that what I wanted to do was to write. I had a little bit of savings. I had a tiny bit of bandwidth. I thought if I don't renew my teaching contract and I set off on my own and try to write this book, I could probably get it written in about 6 months. If I don't have other things going on. And 3 years later, I published the first book. So it took me a little longer than 6 months. But I strung things together along the way. It was like I dove into the deep end with both feet. I didn't know anything about publishing. I had no idea what I was doing.
Incredible.
I didn't know I needed an agent. I didn't know what a book proposal document was. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I had something I wanted to say. I thought I could figure out a way to piece it together. And I figured it out step by step.
You mentioned the pressure of people saying you can't make a living being a writer. I talk to friends who are artists, musicians, like there's certain gifts and categories of work where there's so much baggage around, you know, you can only really do it, or you're only really that thing if you're making a living. Like, is that a kind of false dichotomy? Like, how do you address that topic?
Yes. I mean, well, first of all, I think that sentiment comes from people who are really well-meaning, but who are part of a context that doesn't exist anymore, because the world has changed so dramatically in the last 30 years that, you know, my parents saying that to me, or my high school teachers or whatever, were well-meaning, but they were existing inside of the 80s and 90s, not inside of the, you know, 2023 where we're
like there was
now.
A different way to think about careers and work.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. And they didn't know that like the boom of the internet in the early 2000s really opened up a whole world of possibilities for writers that didn't exist before. Like, you now have people who are making a full-time living on TikTok. So, and
Yeah.
TikTok wasn't even like a spark in someone's brain when I was in high school. And so I think you have to take that into account. That's one thing.
Sure.
And the other thing too, like you're talking about, that we act like that in order to be a real writer, I have to be working full-time as a writer. I have to be making a full-time living as a writer. And of course, there can be some challenges around that. You know, if you're going to be making a full-time living as an author selling books, and books, the average book sells for like $15.99 or whatever. That's a lot of books that you have to sell to be able to feed a family selling a product that's $15.99 a piece. So you got to be selling.
Because you're not getting all that $15.99 by any means.
No.
you're getting you're like pennies,
12%
a dollar,
or 15%, maybe, if you're lucky, and sharing that with your agent. So
exactly.
So you got to be selling. You know, if you want to feed a family selling books, you really have to be selling millions of books. And but the thing I think people don't think about is there are tons of ways to do your creative work, whether that's writing or something else, alongside of a thing that pays the bills. You know, it doesn't have to, they don't have to be in contradiction to one another. And I always tell writers that for centuries, the people who we read as the greats all had other jobs that they were, they were working at the post office, or they were, selling pizzas or whatever it was that they were doing to pay the bills. And then it was like in the midnight hours that they were working on their writing, or in the early morning hours or whatever. And it isn't glamorous, but that is a really effective and possible way to make a living, and also get your writing
can be
done.
Really fulfilling, you know.
100%.
Like it's interesting because it's like it ties into that idea of romanticizing writing or glamorizing it. Like it only looks it looks a certain way. You have this spiritual experience. The words just flow out of onto the page as if from heaven. So that can keep you from writing. But then also glamorizing it like the only real writer is the million selling writer that just does that and only that. There's so many other really fulfilling ways to be writing, and then also doing other fulfilling work that pays the bills. Like that's beautiful too.
The other thing too I want to say is that we have this myth that if I only had more time, then I would fill in the blank. Like, and we do this for everything, not just for our art, but like, if I had more time, I'd go to the gym, or if I had more time, I would write my book. And one of the things I learned when I quit my full-time job is that it really wasn't about having more time on my hands. In fact, there was something incredibly overwhelming about having endless amounts of time on my hands when I quit my full-time job to work on the book. Because then I'm like sitting in my apartment all day for 8 hours a day alone, trying to figure out how to get this book together. And I don't have the first clue what I'm doing. There's so much pressure. Instead of just, if I could go back and tell myself to do it a different way, I'm grateful for all the things that happened and everything I learned. But I would be like, why not just keep it doesn't even have to be the teaching job, any job. Keep a job that pays the bills, that provides some security, and then find some moments in your day where you can focus on this thing that you love and cultivate it and really enjoy the process of putting it together. And it doesn't have to carry the weight of needing to pay your water bill. Let this other thing pay your water bill, and let that be sturdy. And then let this be your outlet, your creative outlet. But yeah, I think I felt at the time it needed to be more all or nothing. So
that's such good advice. What was the moment where you had the idea to want to help other people to write?
It was after my first book came out, because my book came out in September of 2013, my first book, and it did very well in the marketplace. It was, better than I think what my publisher expected it to do, which is great. It wasn't my book has sold, 30,000 copies or something like that. It was great for a first-time author.
Yeah.
But not enough to I'm not like paying my rent with the check, the royalty checks. I still get royalty checks to this day. And it's like, oh, cool, let's go grab dinner with this. But it's not paying the bills. So I was like, okay, I've got this skill set as a teacher. I have a master's degree in education. I know how to put together a curriculum. I've got a little bit of experience as a published author. I would, consider myself a fairly strong writer anyway. So maybe I can put together a curriculum for people who want to put together a book. and I could walk a group of authors through this process. And that was the first iteration of what has become my online course, Prepare to Publish. But that was the first kind of iteration of it. And it was great. It was like a way to connect with other people who loved what I loved, and to put my brain on someone else's project and get out of my own, get sort of out of like my own story or my own brain for a little bit. And I really, really enjoyed it. And it did a great job of paying the bills. And that kind of morphed into doing some editing and developmental editing for authors. And actually, I did a ton of ghostwriting. So that grew into that part of my job. And it's been such a neat way to practice the skill set that I have in a really low pressure environment, because my name's not on the book. And so I get to put the puzzle together, but I don't have to be in charge of the whole thing. And I really enjoyed it.
That's so good. Tell me about this this book, The Power of Writing It Down. It's not just for people who are ready to go out and try to get published.
Yeah, I mean, this was my first time speaking to a group of people who weren't just desiring to be published. So my entire career had been built around aspirational authors. And what I started to see as I worked with this group of people is that regardless of whether or not these people ever published the thing that they were working on, something really profound was happening to them while they were working on the piece of writing. So they would be working on a piece of writing about a relationship, for example, and it would really invite them to ask these deep questions about the relationship. It would pull them into a self-reflection about their their role that they played in the relationship. It would open up their scope of vision to see, new insights that they hadn't seen about the relationship before. Same thing if they were writing about business or leadership or whatever else. It was just writing had this really beautiful way of showing someone a vantage point of their life that they hadn't seen before. And this was true whether they were working on a fiction novel, a personal narrative, memoir type piece, or if they were writing nonfiction that was more didactic, like a book about, how to be a better leader or something. So I just got really curious about this and started digging to see if anyone had done any research, and found this whole body of research that showed that writing can be a really powerful tool to use to, it's like the best therapy in the world, really.
Wow.
But the data shows that, regular practice of writing can improve your physical health. First of all, it can reduce the likelihood that you'll visit the doctor for upper respiratory infections and flu. It can.
That's incredible. That's
isn't
crazy.
that amazing?
It really is.
That's always the stat that I start with, because you're just wait, what? Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
But I'm it's actually having an impact on your biology. It's actually changing the way that your body experiences the environment that it lives in. And that's a lived experience for me too, as a writer. And I would imagine the same is true for you too, that when you face the page to process your life experiences, it changes you. There's no way for it not to change you. And so what I wanted to do with The Power of Writing It Down was offer this as a tool for someone who would think to themselves, oh, I could never publish a book, or I would never want to share my story, in front of a huge audience. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a huge audience. There's power in sharing your story with your children, or sharing your story with your spouse, or sharing your story with your therapist, or with one significant person in your life, or just a group of friends, or whatever.
Or even just the journaling process.
100%.
You go back and you read things, and it, you realize where you've come and how you've journeyed and grown.
Absolutely. The journaling is sharing your story with yourself.
Right.
Which is, we underestimate the power of that, but sharing your story with yourself is what will give you a different vantage point on your life. When you live your life and you have these experiences, you might see them one way. Then when you write them on the page, it's like magic happens, and you just see them a totally different way.
I'm just reflecting on how culture has changed so much. I don't know if in the old days people journaled more, but I'm just thinking about the way that people used to correspond with each other.
Yeah.
Write letters by hand about what's taking place, more news-filled kinds of communications, the reflective kind of communication. That's really missing for most of our lives. I mean, we don't even write emails like that anymore,
No.
So it's like there was like this practice that was present because of the lack of certain technologies and the slowness of the way people communicated, which probably had a physical benefit based on what you're talking about, the research of writing things down. And we've really lost that. Like that does not exist for most people. And so for you to, highlight the power of writing it down, highlight the power of writing your story, and give people categories of why that's useful if you're not like specifically trying to be published, or you're not even doing it for social media, like you're literally doing it for yourself or a specific small group of people. That's a
Yeah.
valuable endeavor.
Well, thank you. I mean, I really do think it is. And I hope people are able to even find a handhold into the practice that's like 5 minutes a day. I try to keep it as simple for people as possible, because people are like, I couldn't do. Julia Cameron's The Artist Way she's like, the goddess of this type of thinking. And she's been leading the charge on this for long before I was even born. She's amazing. She recommends writing for 40 minutes every morning when you wake up. And she has a lot of reasons why she uses that 40-minute mark. But I think for a lot of people, they're like, 40 minutes, that's a lot. I don't know that I can get to 40 minutes. So my take is like, why not try 5? Or why not try 1? Try 1 minute. Try just writing down one thing at the end of your day that was significant to you today, and see if it changes the way that you metabolize your life.
Wow. What would be the prompt that you would encourage someone to try if they are going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to try to write something down? What would the prompt be?
The most universal prompt that I give for people is 5 things that are true for me today. Or you could, if that feels overwhelming, you could do 1 thing that feels true for me today. That's a great prompt to start the day, because it will invite you into present instantly. 1 thing that feels true for me today is I'm exhausted. 1 thing that feels true for me today is I'm overwhelmed. 1 thing that feels true for me today is I'm excited about what's about to happen. 1 thing that feels true for me today is I need more support. 1 thing. So whatever it is, it invites you into presence. It shows you to yourself. The other
but you're naming like real emotions and feelings, and you're acknowledging that and saying that's okay to feel that. Like that's a really significant, even, self-care kind of practice.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and I guess that example shows you how quickly this practice can be healing for people, because, even for myself, like, I've been in therapy for on and off for the last 20 years of my life. I have lots of friends who I feel like I can share honestly with. I've got a really deep and authentic partnership with my husband. So there are a lot of places in my life that I can be honest, but still life moves very fast. And there are some times when, if I were to do that prompt for myself, it would be like, I've had 2 kids in the last 2.5 years. I would say something like, what feels true for me today is I'm really exhausted and I need more support, and just acknowledging that for yourself in this moment in time, even if you don't get the more support that you need, even just saying it out loud is healing, to just admit the truth and let it be, and not have to try to fix it or change it, and let there be space for that truth. And what happens a lot of times is when you admit that to yourself, then you go, I have 1,000 people I could ask for support. Why don't I send a text message? Or why don't I tell my husband I need support? Or why don't I see if I can schedule a nap in, or some coverage so I can get a nap today, or whatever it is. So it just, I hope that demonstrates for people who are
really
listening
does.
How quickly the process can be quite healing.
And it's not just this exercise in, people can be so critical, like, oh, you're just so concerned with yourself, or, it's navel gazing or whatever. I mean, those people can shut up. But the point is that even just that simple aspect of talking about and writing what you're feeling does have a real world impact. It's not just navel gazing. It's actually by slowing down and being honest enough to say what I'm feeling, that can actually allow me to take action. That can actually work into the rest of my life in a way that might not happen if you don't take the time to reflect and think about that.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to speak specifically to people who think that writing is self-indulgent or navel-gazing, because I hear this a lot. People who are worried about writing, a writing practice being self-indulgent, are terrified to look at themselves. If you're worried about a writing practice being self-indulgent, there is a fear there of looking at the self. And there's tons of compassion and love and space for that. That's okay. We all have a fear of looking at ourselves to some extent. But what I want those people to hear is that you have a self. There's nothing you can do about that. You have a self. Your self deserves to take up some space. You're allowed to be here. Your self has a voice that deserves a seat at the table, that deserves to contribute its thoughts, ideas, feelings, emotions, experience just as much as the next person. So of course, writing is self-indulgent. And my take on that is go ahead and indulge yourself. And most of us don't do enough of that. Like most of us don't feel like we have enough of a right to just like take up some space in the world. So you deserve to take up some space.
This podcast is sponsored by the creative agency Clear and Loud. Whatever your business's product, service, or idea, we believe clarity changes everything. We help you clarify your strategy, your brand messaging, and your online content so that you reach the right audience and grow your business. If you're frustrated by an ineffective website, if your message is jumbled and confusing, and you're not getting the traction you want with your marketing, let's talk. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation by visiting clearandloud.com. You and I both come from a religious background. We come from a Christian, evangelical Christian background. And now we're at different places than we were in the past.
Yeah.
How does the process of changing deeply held beliefs overlap with the importance of examining your own story and reflecting on these things and writing these things down? What's the overlap in those kind of two worlds?
Yeah, there's no way I could be where I am if I didn't have the practice of writing down my thoughts and feelings and experiences, because for me at least, and I know this is not true for everyone, some people process by speaking out loud to a friend or whatever. For me, I sometimes don't know what I think or feel about something until I see it written in front of me. And I think there are a lot of different reasons for that. There are all different rabbit trails I could go down about like what is happening in your brain. But I think what I would say is that writing invites you into a space of presence where you see things from a different vantage point than you would otherwise. So what happens for me when I write things down is I start to hear, I call it my narrator voice, but your narrator voice comes out. See, there's the voice of you in the moment that you're experiencing things that are frustrating or upsetting or taxing or whatever. And you're just like, the voice that's like, I hate this. And that person, it's the critical voice. It's like that's fine. I mean, it's maybe the voice of the ego, but then there's your narrator voice. That's your wiser, more intuitive, the higher version of you voice that comes through in your writing when you are in the practice of doing this regularly, that starts to see things from the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
That's like, I see that you're tired. I see that this is hard. And also this, and also don't forget. And also, or like the voice that's like, she couldn't see it then, but she would understand later.
Right.
That's the narrator voice.
Yeah.
And so that voice starts to come through after a while.
I was just going to say too, I feel like that narrator voice is sometimes more honest about the true feelings that are being processed, because for a lot of us, especially if we come from a religious background, we're not prone to be honest about what we're really wanting or desiring. We're kind of like, what am I supposed to want? And what do other people around me want? What does God want? What does my pastor want? Like all those different kinds of things. And so I think that sometimes that narrator perspective is actually, they weren't happy. Actually, this wasn't working. Actually, you know what I mean? Like, and that's very powerful to be honest with yourself.
Totally. I mean, I think that's the beauty of a practice like writing, is that there's no one there to judge you except for maybe you, or like a part of you that feels critical of you. But it's like, if there's a thing you want to say that you feel you can't say in certain settings, maybe some people who are listening feel like, I don't have friends who I feel like I can be honest with, or I don't have a partner who I feel like I can be open with, or you may not have a bunch of people in your life who you feel like you can be totally yourself with, and that's okay. Writing is a way for you to have a space in your life where you can be 100% honest and you don't have to worry about judgment from anybody else. So, and honestly, this is what drew me to writing in the first place. Like, I talked about my start with writing was in my 20s when I quit my job. But really, my earlier start with writing was I picked up a journal and a pen because I was a little girl who had experienced crazy trauma, and I was inside of an environment that I didn't feel safe to talk about what had happened to me. And I didn't have anyone to tell. And so I just wrote, and I wrote things that I knew other people wouldn't understand. And I really believe writing saved my life. And, it saved my life a dozen times over or so. But I think that what I want to say is that's the beauty of the writing process is that even if you can't be honest anywhere else, you can be honest here.
Do you think that people that are coming from a more rigid, dogmatic kind of background, and that could be a lot of different places, that there's sort of this voice of judgment for taking up space of, you mentioned it being self-indulgent to write your own story and to process your feelings. I just saw somebody posted on Instagram this clip from a pastor teacher, Francis Chan, who's a very well-known Christian teacher. And he was specifically criticizing this generation. And the person posting who's a gay pastor who's basically saying this is crap. Like what Francis Chan is saying here is really toxic. But what Francis Chan was saying was the problem with this generation is you turn inward, you look at your own feelings, you're so concerned with your own thoughts and all these things. And the kind of classic evangelical statement is that's the wrong approach. It's the word of God that needs to be the truth that guides everything. And so it's interesting. I just, as we're talking, I hear that voice of criticism of, wait a second, you're encouraging people to focus on their own story and their own feelings and this narrator voice and so on. But really they need to shove all that down and just let, God's word direct everything they do. So do you feel like it's almost like the people you work with, it's harder to engage in this process because of those old beliefs or current beliefs?
100%. And I mean, I have that inside of me too. I think and maybe this is preaching to the choir because I'm imagining your listeners are probably on a similar page to me, but I think the big mistake that we made inside of those evangelical communities, and maybe in most cases, this mistake was made just, not maliciously, but talking about selflessness, sort of elevating selflessness as this, if you're really a good person, you'll be totally selfless and you'll give to others until you don't have anything else to give. The part that you're missing from that is that in order to give selflessly, you have to have a self. And so we have to, I believe you have to understand the self and hold the self in great honor in order to outgrow the self and feel like, this is happening to me with young kids right now. I didn't have kids until I was later in life. I had my daughter when I was 37 and my son when I was 39. And, or I guess my daughter when I was 38. And so I'm a little bit of an older mom. And I felt like going into motherhood, I'm like, I really did it up. Like I did the whole 20s. Like I traveled everywhere. I did everything I wanted to do. I like had my life. I spent all my money on myself. And I was like very ready to move into a phase of my life where it wasn't about me. And there's still there's some growing pains to learning how to like really give of yourself to these other people. But what I feel like is happening for me is that I also kind of came into myself later in life. I learned what it meant to have a self, to honor the self, to hold the self with great care. Yeah. And then that allows me to be in a phase of my life now where I can give with no resentment of myself to my children and give up the things that were so important to me because I'm like, I've done that. I filled myself up with myself. And then I was like, I've done that. I've had enough. Now I can, but if you skip that middle stage, I think this is why you get a lot of people who come out of evangelical spheres who like are almost stunted. Like they've never really gotten to have the phase of life where it was about them. And so that's my take. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this part of the topic, but I feel like we sort of jump over the stage where you have a self in search of this selflessness, that then we feel like we're selfless, but we're very resentful for how selfless we are.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
don't
a
know.
great, I think that's a great description of many people's experience, which is why it feels so foreign to, reflect on your own story, to think about what you want, to actually, as you said, take up space for yourself.
Yeah,
It's like a muscle that you've never exercised before, and it can feel very
100%.
awkward.
Yeah,
Uh,
100%.
I came out to your in-person workshop. My girlfriend Kelly and
Yes.
I came out
Yeah.
to this workshop that you run with Donald Miller, Write Your Story, and it was really powerful. I hope that some of the people listening will try to get to the next one. I know you're doing another one in
Yeah.
October of 2023. But one of the things that struck me is that I felt like half the people, at least in the workshop I was in, half the people were deconstructing. And the story that they were kind of working on in the workshop was kind of about leaving old beliefs or processing traumatic things and, coming
Yeah.
out on the other side. But then the other half were people who were still very much firmly in the church, just lovely people. And they were saying, I'm still here. And, I've gone
Yeah.
through certain things, but my beliefs really hold firm. I guess I was just curious your reflection on that, like the fact that these very different, um, viewpoints are all in the same room. They're all
Yeah.
working on their story. They're all supporting each other, in that,
Yeah.
even though the outcomes are different. I was just really fascinated by that.
Well, my take on it is that after, having worked with hundreds of people who over the years who are telling personal stories, is that the telling of personal stories is an incredibly connective experience.
Mm,
It's like the memory you have of camping when you were little, or being at camp and sitting around the campfire and you're all telling these sort of legendary stories from your life, and you're
yeah.
laughing and you're
Yeah.
crying and you're connecting with each other. That's what it's like to come together in a group of people and share
Mm-hmm.
intimate details from your life, personal experiences that mean a lot to you. And not just the experiences, but also your reflections on them. And everyone is going to come to a different conclusion
Yeah.
than someone else would. If I
Mm-hmm.
lived through your life experience, I might come to a different conclusion than you did, and vice versa.
Right. Right.
But the beauty is in saying, this was my life experience. This is the conclusion that I came to. And then you connecting to my story and
Yeah.
me hearing your story and seeing how you made sense of it, and me connecting to you through that. And there's this connective tissue there that's really beautiful, because you can't argue with someone else's experience.
Mm,
You could, I suppose, argue with their take on the experience,
yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you see people's humanity come through in the way they tell their story, you start to understand why they would hold the perspective that they
Right.
have. And what it's done for me is it's healed me. I feel like, coming out of evangelical culture, I deconstructed, or whatever that means, and then have this new faith that I don't have language for, I don't have like a label or a category for it, but
Yeah.
I do have like a deep spirituality that exists in my life. And then this new level of healing that's coming for me now is being able to connect with people who still are in the category I was in before, and actually honoring deeply
Mm,
their experience.
yes.
It was very hard for me for a while to do that, because it was triggering my own wounds.
Mm-hmm.
But now I meet people and am friends with people and have people in my life and in my sphere who are still, still speaking the way I would have spoken back then, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I don't take it as like,
A
someday
personal attack. Yeah.
they'll learn. Yeah. Or something.
Yeah.
I don't need them to
Yeah.
get to where I am.
Right.
I feel like if there can be mutual respect, that's the one thing there has to be, is that
Mm,
they respect my perspective and I
yeah.
respect their perspective. Then there can be connection there. And that's very healing for me.
I think that's so beautiful. And I think it's so needed, in the world. There's so much empathy and compassion that's needed across all the ideas that divide us and the viewpoints that divide us politically and, ethnically and all those kinds of things. And religion obviously being a huge one. Um, I agree. I think it's so important for, hopefully that we get to that point where we can honor other people's stories, even if they're radically different than ours.
Yeah.
It's a
And I
beautiful
mean, when
thing.
I feel like if you look at the world through the lens of the media, or if you look at the world through the lens of the media right now, it's getting harder and harder to believe this. But I really believe that if you understood a person's story, you would understand exactly why they've acted in the ways that they've acted, even if those ways have been very damaging and destructive to others. So, and that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it connects us all in our humanity. That's just my belief. And I think it's probably why I've given my life to this work of helping people tell their stories, because I think there's so much that we can understand if we just, understood what people had lived through.
Which is why, we need people to keep writing memoirs. I think it's easy for authors to think, oh, well, gosh, I don't, who needs to hear my story? Well, why should I take the time? Or, it's hard work to write. And I think it's precisely because of what you're saying, that every person is unique. Every journey is unique. And even if it's not a bestseller, that sharing of that story gives insight and perspective to others that allows them to be more compassionate, or allows them to make sense of their own story. So, I mean, we've kind of been focused on the personal benefits of the process, but it's like the world needs those stories out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about this a lot, where I say to people, if you think about this period of time that we've lived through, that's so historic, 2020, 2021, 2022, that's kind of like the 2-year window that we've lived through this crazy global pandemic and everything that came along with that. If in 15 years we're reading about this in history books, wouldn't you want your take on what it was like to be alive during this time, to be included or to be valued? Just to have that space at the table, like we can rely on 10 white dudes to write the history book about what it meant to be alive in 2020, or we can all throw our card into the hat and say, this is what it was like to be alive and to be me in 2020. Right. And I think until we've collected hundreds of thousands or millions of these stories, we don't really have a full picture of what it meant to be alive in that time period. And we've seen what happens when we leave the writing of history to a small group of people, that the story can be slanted and twisted in whatever way benefits the people who are writing it. And I really believe we're moving into an era where information is not going to be, it's not going to be manned by only like a small group of human beings. That information is going to be so much more accessible, and that everybody's going to get to have an opportunity to put their name in the hat. So I'm like, why not get started now? Why not start putting your voice into the ring?
Let's talk about people who specifically want to write a memoir, or maybe not even just a memoir, but want to get published.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing someone can do who has that dream to write and share their story?
The most important thing you can do is decide you're going to do it regardless of what else happens, because you're going to, if you have the dream to publish your piece of work, whether that's a nonfiction, fiction, memoir, whatever it is that you want to write, that includes this publishing industry that's going to throw a lot of things at you, pieces of advice that are good pieces of advice for the world of publishing, but that can be very disorienting, overwhelming, disqualifying, can incite all kinds of imposter syndrome and whatever else. You'll hear things like, well, you need a platform to write a book. So go, build your Instagram, or go get on TikTok or whatever. You'll hear, you got to find an agent. So people will come to me and they'll be like, how do I find a literary agent? And I'm like, what are you shopping? And they're like, I don't have a book yet. I'm like, you don't, it's great to be curious and to know about, literary agents and whatever else, but you don't need a literary agent unless you have a book to shop. So first things first, let's get you a book to shop. That's actually the heavy lift. That's the hardest part of the job. And then once you have a book that's interesting, then the next step would be to go find an agent and, to represent you and get connected to a publisher. But those pieces to the puzzle are actually the easy pieces. And I the reason that the advice about growing your platform bothers me so much is that there's nothing more antithetical to writing a great book than going to grow your Instagram platform. You could go, like make reels all day long and have 100,000, 500,000, a million followers on Instagram and still not have a book idea that's worth writing or worth selling.
So true.
So start with the book idea, start with the thing, just get excited about it, about creating something and get invested in it and get obsessed with it and just spend your time on it, and like let it fuel you. And then later, when you've got something that you want to show to people, then think about, how am I going to show this to people? Maybe it's on Instagram. Maybe it's from a stage. Maybe
you'll be an author who is never big on social media. You know what I mean?
100%.
Like there's not one way to do it. Yeah.
I was just posting on Instagram the other day about.
You were great on social media, by the way.
Thank you.
For everyone who's listening, you should definitely follow Allie's Instagram account.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I try to keep it real on social media because it can get to be such a thing. But no, I was saying that I was late to the game, but I finally read Educated. I'm blanking on her name all of a sudden, and I know it, but I can't think of who wrote Educated.
It's Cheryl Strayed? Is that the name?
No, Educated. Cheryl Strayed's Wild. Educated is. Hold on, I gotta say it.
Let's Google it.
Tara Westover. So this was like a breakout, crazy success in 2019. It took
Educated
me a long time
is the one where she was like
raised in a very
strict Mormon family,
fundamentalist Mormon family, and was not educated her whole life. Didn't go to school, and then ended up getting her PhD from Cambridge University. So she has this incredible transformation. It's amazing. It's like so brilliantly written. She's so amazing. The book has been endorsed by Barack Obama, like every Forbes, New York Times list, like every publication that you would want to be endorsed by, this woman has been endorsed. And just out of curiosity, I went to her Instagram because I thought I'd follow her. She has, in 2023, 8,000 followers on Instagram. So I was just like, this crock of BS that we're being sold that you can't publish a book unless you have at least 50,000 followers on Instagram is such noise. And it really gets in the way of people falling in love with the process of just making something that they love.
Right.
So I'm like, just make something that you love. And there are other stories I could tell too. William Paul Young, who wrote The Shack. This was kind of before the craze of social media, but he had no publishing experience before he wrote that book. He wrote that book for his 4 kids.
First,
his original copies of that book were printed at Kinko's. And he was like slinging that book from the trunk of his car at church, and then had a distribution deal with a publisher later down the road. But, and now that book has sold, I don't know, like 20 something million copies and has been made into a major motion picture. So it's just another great example of the fact that if you write something really compelling that moves people, it can sell copies, but don't make selling copies the thing. Make writing something compelling
kill the joy.
Moves people it kills the joy. That's it. You said it better than I did.
Well, it's what you're describing too. I guess it feels like there's a lot of like predatory advice or misinformation, or I don't even know what the motivation of it is that's out there. But do you observe that? I just feel like people who want to write are at such a vulnerable point because it is.
Yes.
It's so difficult to get started, to keep going. It feels like this really closed industry with all these gatekeepers. So it just seems ripe for people taking advantage of people.
It's incredibly closed. And this is what I think is evolving. I mean, publishing is getting turned on its head already because of COVID. But, the publishing is like a dinosaur of an industry and it's very insular. And I think when people give advice like people are well-meaning, I believe, most people, when they say, you need 50,000 followers on Instagram, you need an agent, you need this, you need that. Because what they're saying is, don't get your hopes up that you could just go write a book and get it published. Because for most people, that's not the story. Or maybe
even don't get your hopes up that if you get published, the publisher's going to do anything for you. So you better be selling it yourself. Yeah,
100%. So I think people are well-meaning in that, but what they're talking about is an industry that intentionally, the industry itself intentionally keeps people out.
Right.
Intentionally, publishing as an industry has evolved from a caste system where only certain people were even given access to learn how to read and write. And we've obviously evolved thousands of years from that, but, just depends on how you're measuring, but we've evolved from a caste system where we shut people out from learning how to read and write. But what publishing as an industry does say is only these couple of people get to have their name as part of the canon. And then the rest of the people are just common people, you know? And I really think this is changing so fast right now, because self-publishing has never been easier than ever before. In 2023, if you want to self-publish a book, you need $0. You need a home computer. That's about all you need. And you can publish a book. And speaking of publishing, you have a platform like Instagram. You can publish whatever the heck you want from your with just a couple of clicks from your smartphone. So if you have a device on which you can publish, you don't need to wait for the gatekeepers anymore. You can publish whatever you want, whenever you want, and it can say whatever you want it to say. So I think this is going to allow for people to express themselves. You're seeing more and more indie writers be very successful doing what they're doing because they're just writing something compelling that people want to read, and they're putting it out there in the world and having great success with that. So, so I think it's a really great time to be a writer if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah, it's a massive sea change, isn't it? Just the presence of the internet, the kind of going past the gatekeepers on so many fronts. I mean, media, the fact that we can have a conversation like this and publish a podcast. In the past, you had to get on radio shows, you had to, get access to these places. And now that's very different. One of the things that I love about the way you've structured your business is that I feel like you're trying to provide support to people at all different stages of their writing process, as well as just, different places financially. There's some people that can't afford to invest a lot in their writing endeavors. You've got a great book that they can pick up, or you've got different courses. And I'm just wondering if you could walk through from sort of the starter and least expensive ways to get help from you, all the way up to, kind of the top tier kind of coaching and support that you offer. You just give a quick overview of what some of those things look like?
Totally. So I have a totally free offering if you go to my Instagram link in my bio and click it, there's an offering there right at the top.
And what's your handle on Instagram? We'll put it in the show notes, but what is it? Alley
Fallon, Allly, and then Fallon, just like Jimmy Fallon, Fallon.
Awesome.
And the link that's in my bio will take you directly to, it's called the Book Idea Primer. But this is a great primer exercise for anyone who's like, I think I have a book, but I'm not totally sure what it is about or how to define it or how to even talk about it. It's 5 exercises that you can do on your own in your own time that will help you develop the idea so that you feel like you can say, oh, this is what my book is going to be about when I write it.
That's awesome. That's huge.
So that's a really great place for anyone to start who, has a book idea, but they're not totally sure how to say what it is just yet. You mentioned this workshop that I teach with Don Miller. It's called Write Your Story. The workshop is designed for people who don't necessarily have publishing aspirations. It's designed for people who just have a story that they'd like to tell. But because of the nature of the workshop, it's in person, it's on Don's property, it's very private and intimate. It is a higher ticket item. So if that isn't accessible for everybody, we're working on more virtual digital options now that will be much more accessible for anyone who wants to participate in that. So that will be coming later this year. But I just wanted to put that out there if anyone is interested in learning more about that. You can stay informed at writeyourstory.com. If you go there and sign up for the wait list, you'll be the first to know when we launch any of those new products. And then also when we open registration for the October workshop, you'll know about that too. I have an online course called Prepare to Publish that if you know your book idea and you're ready to get started outlining it is a great way to do that. That's at my website, findyourvoice.com. And then I also do one-on-one coaching, which is where I take you for a full day. We sit down together and take your book idea and turn it into a really robust outline that you can use to write the book. And that's perfect for someone who's like, I'm ready to go. Like I've been thinking about this for too long. I've got to get this book out of me. I'm ready to get the outline down. When you leave with that outline, you have your roadmap for writing your book. And I've watched clients get their book written in 3 weeks to like 6 months after that day together. So that's a really good opportunity too.
So that's obviously a big investment, but there's a huge payoff in terms of the spark that gives them. So you're taking a full day, and you do this virtually, or you do this in person, or how does that work when you coach someone?
Either way. So
do you have people that fly into Nashville to do this with you?
Yeah, quite often I have people who fly to Nashville to do it with me. During the pandemic, we were doing it all virtually, so I do have a way to do that. But yeah, it's really great to get in the same room with someone too, if that works. So
good.
I was going to say too, in regards to making an investment, that sometimes it's just a matter of like, I don't have the resources to do that. But I also like to say that you don't have to make a huge investment in a book if it's not, it doesn't feel like aligned for you. If you're not planning to publish and you're not planning to generate revenue from a product, I wouldn't necessarily recommend investing thousands of dollars, even if you have the money. So I always tell people, like, try to think about what your publishing aspirations are. And if you're planning to get an agent and go with a publishing route and, get an advance on royalties and sell a bunch of books and whatever, then invest the money in the front end so that you can make this product as, the best product that it can possibly be. But you can also get really creative for how to manage the process without spending a ton of money and just have a ton of fun with it. And maybe it takes a little bit longer, and that's okay. I always tell people who are writing books for fun, like, don't invest thousands of dollars in writing a book for fun. Just have fun doing it. Yep.
I love it. So last question, are you working on any new books yourself?
I am. I'm like 85% of the way done writing a book called Write Your Story.
Awesome.
That will be part of this. I don't know what to call it. Part of, like, there'll be a book called Write Your Story. We're going to do a simple online course called Write Your Story that will be very accessible and priced so that, people can have access to it. And then we'll see what else comes from there. There'll probably be a podcast and some other things, but
good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Allie, thanks for the courage that it's taken for you to share your own story, and then just the fact that you're helping others to do that. I'm really grateful for that.
Thanks for having me on. This has been really fun. I've loved it.
Fun conversation. Thanks for listening to the Clear and Loud podcast. I'm your host, Josh Harris. Our producer is Pam Cameron, and this episode contains music by Jeremy Yaddo at Music for Podcasts. If you like what you hear, give us a boost by subscribing or leaving a review on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen. We'd also love your feedback on today's episode. Or if you have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode or a guest you'd like us to consider, email us at hello@clearandloud.com. You can also shoot us a direct message on Instagram. Our handle is @clearandloud. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.